Two to go. Aloe Conson asks, is the K shift imminent, or are we stuck with this R-selected Meyer for the foreseeable future? I did have one little arcade thought not too long ago, and it's got to do with the yin-yang symbol. You know, the rotating kind of crescents. They look a bit like teardrops that are bending around in a circle. When that sometimes it's not done correctly, because when it is done correctly, you get the little black tadpole and chasing the little white tadpole, and it's a giant wheel, a giant circle of these two things. But for it to be done accurately, the white tadpole has to have a black dot right in the middle of the head, and the black tadpole has to have a white dot right in the middle of the head. And the reason that those were there on the original symbol was to represent the idea that the seed of the one is buried in the other. The seed of the yin is buried in the yang, and the seed of the yang is buried in the yin. And this is the thought that I've actually had recently. And that is that this is obviously a cycle of history. It doesn't feel like a wheel. And the reason it doesn't feel like a wheel is because the legs are a very, very different length. The amount of time it takes to build a society is centuries. The amount of time it takes to destroy a society is years or decades. And so one is much more laborious and slow and tedious and takes much, much longer. The other one's very, very quick. So it's whap, boom, whap, boom, like that. The analogy I was going to use for RK was going to be one of those, do you remember those drinking bird things? They used to be really popular. They're kind of cool. It's a glass bulb with a long neck, and it's filled with a red liquid. And it's got a little bird's head on the top with a top hat, and he's got a little beak. And you bend the thing over, and he wets his beak, and then he sits up. All the fluid flows out of the bulb, and he's into the bulb, and he sits up. And as he sits up, all of a sudden he starts to rock. And the reason he rocks is because there's evaporation coming off of that beak, and it's pulling liquid up this tube. And so it's like drink, and then he's up, and it's like tilt, 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 drink, whoosh, up, doink, 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 up. That's what civilization looks like. That's what the cycles of civilization look like. Long time going one way, very quick going the other. So the reason I came back to the yin-yang thing is the seed of the one is in the other, and that's the thought I had. The seed of an R society is built into a K society, and the seed of a K society is built into the R society. So the way to think of that, at least the way I think about it, is when you have a growing society, a society on the rise, a healthy society that's expanding, that's confident, that's got a lot of unity, it's fighting for its life, and then suddenly it's doing well, and it's doing very well, then it's on its way up. Embedded in that K society is the success that's going to come, and when that success comes, it's going to lead to progressivism, and that will destroy that society. So the seeds of progressivism are built into the conservative growth of a civilization. And the more successful the Ks are at creating the civilization, the more successful they are at trade, which is competition, the more successful they are at warfare, which is competition, the more successful they are at innovation, which is competition, the more successful they will be. And the more successful they will be, the sooner that R seed will come out, because people start to perceive success and security and prosperity as the default condition, and then everybody flips over to R, and then we don't care if we waste $50 billion on something else. Well, it's just money. We got plenty of money. No, we don't. All this stuff that's tolerated, all this weakness, all this, if people are getting lathered up about things like trigger warnings, you don't have that problem when, wolves eat your little sister. You pretty much get in there. And so the seeds of the R society are built into the K. The seeds of the collapse, of the progressive collapse of civilization, is built into the growing conservative civilization. And likewise, unfortunately, or fortunately, the seed of a K society is built into the Rs. Right now, it's become an R society. Our society's become R. We become based on reproductive rate and anti-competition and anti-fitness and all the rest. So this society is going to collapse. And when it does collapse, the people who are going to go extinct are not conservatives. They're going to be the liberals. Because when the ATMs go down and when the rule of law breaks down, the people that will survive will be the ones who know how to shoot and know how to ration, know how to take care of themselves. That's us. And so the seeds of the destruction of the K society are built into the R's, and the seeds of the destruction of the R society built into the K's. And that's why it's a circle. That's why it goes round and round and round. Hyper Ion team over there just put up a comment that I liked. I don't know if I talked to you about this before. If I have, it'll be a while. He asked me if I was going to talk about the Kafers. I would be absolutely amazed if he had come up with this on his own. And gosh darn it, I've got his name, Bill. He had a brother, science fiction guy. Okay, so look. So there was a science fiction role-playing game that I played a lot of when I was a kid called Traveler. And Traveler was written by a guy named Mike. And a bunch of the early guys who were contributing to the original Traveler was a guy named Bill. Somebody will come up in a second for me here. And he was just an artist. He was a sketch artist and stuff. So Traveler ran its course around, I guess, 7, 8 great years. And then they decided to, kind of up it and modify it and redo it. And they came out with a game called Traveler 2300, which is set much, much closer in the future. It's much more practical and gritty. I like 2300 an awful lot. All spaceship combat was much more realistic, all that stuff. And then there was an alien race in Traveler 2300 written by Bill. Damn it. I want to say O'Neill, but that's not it. Somebody come up with it in a second. So, William Keith. So Bill Keith basically wrote, it was basically just a science fiction role-playing game supplement about an alien race. And the alien race was called the Kafers. And William Keith, 30 years ago, got this whole thing, whether he knew it or not, he got it. So let me just tell you about this, because it's actually a very profoundly interesting way to think about what we're seeing here. According to Keith, there's this ancient race called the Kafers, and they've been around for hundreds of thousands of years. They had civilization for hundreds of thousands of years, and the base intelligence of a Kafer soldier is 60 or 70. They're barely able to get dressed. Because unlike us, who are descended from hunters and gatherers, the Kafers were descended from scavengers on a planet with a great deal of ultraviolet light. And they have these giant carapaces on their back. That's why they call them Kafers, because they look like gigantic insects. So what he wanted was a really brutal alien, big and strong because the planet had much higher gravity, so they're faster than we are because their gravity's higher, because things fall faster. They're stronger, they're much, much tougher. And they're brutal, and they've got these mandibles in their face that look a bit like the Predator in Aliens versus Predator. But here's the thing about the Kafers that William Keith did that was just genius. Basically what he said was, this species had evolved in an interesting way, where if they were feeding on a carcass, these proto-Kafers, pre-civilized Kafers, if they were feeding on a carcass, you don't need a whole lot of intelligence. Intelligence is really slowing you down. It's just a lot of stuff you have to carry, and you don't really need it. But he said that if a threat came along, something very similar to the adrenaline reaction in humans, where if you're just relaxing or something, you hear a loud noise or you see a monster or something like that, your body pumps adrenaline into your system. What the adrenaline does is it gets your heart rate up right away, constricts all these blood vessels, gets you going, ready to fight or flee. And he said that what the Kafers had happen to them was that similar kind of reaction, but basically what it did was it instantly cranked their IQ up 20 or 30 points. 20 or 30 points. A very quick and very short-term IQ boost to help them deal with the threat. And if they survived the threat, then within an hour or so, they'd revert back to their 60 or 70 IQ, except that every time it happened, there was some small residual gain of an IQ point or so. And so what happened to this species was, if you survived enough combats, let's say you start out with an IQ of 70, and you survive 10 combats, and every time in 10 combats, you have this quick boost of intelligence, maybe knock you all the way up to 100 or something. And then instead of going down to 70, you went down to 72. And the next time you went down to 78. And the next time you went down to 81. Then you went down to 83. After a number of combats, your base intelligence would be permanently higher. And so basically what he said was, the cycle of civilization for the Kafers was groups of warrior tribes, which were very successful warriors, got ever more successful because they became more and more intelligent. Every battle they fought, they became more and more intelligent. And once they got intelligent enough, they realized, you know what, we shouldn't be wandering out there like nomads. Let's build some walls. Let's build a city. We can smelt some weapons. And then you had the smartest of these Kafers behind city walls with like bronze weapons, going out against these nomadic savages out there with either sticks or sharp rocks or whatever. And needless to say, you've got the smartest animals in a city with better weapons. They're invincible for a generation. And the new Kafers growing up inside the city get no hardship at all. They get no threats. They get no stimulation. They get stupid. While meanwhile, outside the walls, the term he used were the smart barbarians. They're having to deal with all kinds of predators. They're having to deal with looking for food. So the people outside the walls are constantly being challenged and threatened. So their intelligence level is staying relatively high. And after a generation or two or three, the city dwellers who built all this stuff are so stupid because of their security that the external smart barbarians come in and kick their butts. And then they become the city dwellers, and they get stupid. And then the new nomads come in and kick their butts. And the Kafers had a dread, a sort of an innate sort of a dread, like the boogeyman, as an ancestral kind of a fear of the smart barbarians, of those people outside the walls who were smarter than they were, who were going to come and kill them and eat their children, because they were cannibalistic, these Kafers, or could be. And so how did this cycle ever get broken? Well, it turned out that a Kafer genius named Striker of Stars was born a genius. He may have been like 110 IQ, a really very smart Kafer. Was born aware enough when they have a naming ceremony, the first time they inflict violence on them, and they wake up with this kind of sudden, like, oh my God, they're aware of things. And they're first time this happens to them, they said, name yourself. And usually it's, they're so confused, it's just a name. But if somebody had the presence of mind to pick a name for himself, a name of power and destiny, that was a guy to watch. So this one little Kafer genius is, in ritual combat, and he gets this adrenaline boost, and his IQ's up there, and name yourself. I am Striker of Stars. Well, Striker of Stars was a Kafer genius. And Striker of Stars was smart enough to realize what was going on. And so what he did was, he said, the only way that we can stop this descent into stupidity is to have violence institutionalized into society. And he did this by having games. Criminals would be thrown into an arena and they'd be hunted by other guys. And if you achieved a position of power, it was not only acceptable, but it was expected that the people below you would try to kill you off and take your position. That would keep you sharp and on alert and all this other stuff. And so basically, he'd really come up with an analog for this RK kind of thing, where prosperity makes you stupid and hardship makes you smart. And the people with the hardship keep conquering the people with the prosperity until finally they realized what was going on, and then they had to add artificial hardship into their society, and that's how they got into space. They added artificial hardship into their society on a regular basis. One of the funny things about it, which was really clever, was that when humans were watching these Kafer squads of these soldiers, they realized that the officers would beat them before they gave them an order. It's not like we gave you an order and they didn't do anything, so then they'd beat them as punishment. They went down the line and just hit them all with clubs before they gave them the order. They hit them with the clubs to make them smart enough to understand the order. But once they'd had this adrenaline thing, these guys were deadly. They were absolutely natural warriors, and they just, all these stories about humans open fire and ambush these Kafers, and you think they got all of them, but it turns out the Kafers were hiding, and one Kafer, shot from a cow, and then they launched a grenade at the cow, but it didn't kill the Kafer, so he crawled out of the cow and opened fire again, and then they blew the living cow up, and they lost more guys, and the Kafer crawled back in the cow because they were certain that nobody would be in the cow, and he opened fire again, killed another 6 guys. It's incredible. So, yeah, I think the reason that the Kafer example is so important is M2 Foster just took the words right out of my mouth. You need stressors, you need challenges, you need conflict. And if you're not going to get real ones, you have to simulate them. Because if you simulate them, you get, you get most of what you need. The reason that most veterans are so conservative is not because, well, you had to be fairly conservative to go in the first place. But I've said this before. I spend a fair amount of time on the web looking for some of these horrible things because I need to know what's actually going on out there, and I want to toughen myself up. I've seen people beaten to death. I've seen people necklaced with burning tires. I've seen people had cinder blocks thrown on their heads. I've seen all of this. And when you've seen this, when you see what people not only can do, but do all the time in that big world out there, in most of the world, you see what happens to somebody who steals a bicycle in an African village, or what happens to a guy who's molested a child in Brazil. You see what it's like to see a guy beaten to death over 20 minutes, and when he's bleeding out and gasping for breath and they pour gasoline on him and set him on fire, you begin to realize that this whole Disneyland thing is an illusion, and it's maintained by tough people who volunteer to go out there. And it stresses me enough to realize that no, the guys that are out there are the right guys, and the guys that are in their hot tubs in the Hollywood Hills or in their faculty lounge at Harvard don't have a goddamn clue what's going on in the world. Not a clue. They don't know, and they don't want to know. They think that wishing makes things so, and they think that, if you concentrate on the color, purple, maybe your crops will grow better, and all the rest of this nonsense. And we got to fight them. We got to fight them. That's all there is to it. And that's why they want us eliminated. They want conservatives out of the picture. I'm not saying they want us in death camps, although some of them do. They would like us to go away because we make them uncomfortable by pointing out that reality is not as pleasant as they want to believe it is. They don't like us doing that. And that's why they don't like us defending ourselves either, because when one of us defends ourselves, it proves that our theory is right, that courage will save your life. They don't want to hear that because they don't have any courage. They'd rather just everybody died equally. I'm convinced of that. Anyway, I think that'll probably do it for episode 104. Just your standard basic Stratosphere Lounge. Not too long this time, 1 hour and 43 minutes of outgassing by yours truly, Bill Whittle here at the Stratosphere Lounge. And as always, we like to close by thanking our members. I've got a bunch of ideas about this. I really want to talk about it tonight. I'll let this sit a little while longer, but I did have a really tremendous flash of insight on what I'm doing wrong with this business and what I'm actually selling. I'd really just suddenly lit up as, oh, I see, doing everything backwards. So we can have that conversation maybe next week or the week after. We'll see. Hope to get some flying done between now and then. But as always, I want to thank all of you out there, Stratosphere Loungers. That's family, and especially those of you who are subscribers over at BillWhittle.com. You put the orange paint on the wall back there. You put the Gorn Captain right there. That's all because of you, and we're very, very grateful as always. So thanks for joining us, and I suppose it's really just down to we'll see you next time. So for everybody here at the Stratosphere Lounge HQ, I'm Bill Whittle, and we'll see you for 105.